The 10th of May, 1940. Forming part of the larger Battle of France, the German army, the Wehrmacht, launched their offensive against Belgium. Armored and infantry units advance with speed and coordination, breaking defensive lines and forcing Allied armies into retreat. 2 weeks later, the Western campaign is reaching its decisive phase as German forces push through Belgium toward the English Channel coast. Along the Lys River and the Schipdonk Canal in Flanders, Belgian troops attempt to delay this advance in order to protect withdrawing Allied units and the endless columns of civilians fleeing westward, and villages such as Vinkt and Meigem suddenly find themselves on the front line of a vast military operation that stretches from the North Sea to the Ardennes. In this atmosphere of rapid movement and mounting losses, violence against civilians begins to accompany the fighting. Accusations of resistance by local inhabitants, frustration among German soldiers facing determined defense, and the pressure to secure key crossings contribute to escalating brutality. The massacre that follows in the villages of Vinkt and Meigem becomes one of the largest crimes committed by the Wehrmacht during the campaign in the West, with 140 civilians dead. But the perpetrators will pay for this crime with their own lives. The Second World War had begun on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland, triggering a conflict that quickly spread across the continent. After the defeat of Poland, the Western Front remained relatively quiet for several months. This changed on the 10th of May 1940, when Germany launched a large-scale and carefully coordinated offensive against France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, known as the Battle of France. German armored units advanced with great speed, breaking through defensive lines while aircraft bombed airfields, roads, and communications centers to paralyze resistance. The French army suffered heavy defeats, and British forces were steadily pushed back toward the English Channel coast. Along the Lys River, Belgian troops fought desperately to slow the German advance and to protect the retreat of Allied soldiers and the massive columns of civilians fleeing westward. By the 24th of May 1940, the front line had reached the Schipdonk Canal near the town of Deinze, about 20 kilometers or roughly 12 miles southwest of the city of Ghent. The canal and its bridges were of great strategic importance. Control of these crossings meant control of movement toward the coast, where British and French troops were already being encircled near Dunkirk. At the same time, at least 1 million Belgian civilians were fleeing westward. Many feared a repetition of the atrocities committed by German soldiers during the First World War, when thousands of civilians had been executed, imprisoned, and deported in Belgium during the German occupation. In this tense situation, the Belgian 1st Division of the Chasseurs Ardennais, meaning Ardennes Hunters, prepared to defend the canal line. The Ardennes Hunters were a light infantry formation trained for swift movement and defensive fighting. Their task was to hold the bridges as long as possible in order to keep open an escape route for Allied soldiers cut off from their units, and for the mass of Belgian refugees moving away from the front lines. Facing them was the German 225th Infantry Division. After Germany's victory in Poland, the division had been transferred to the Western Front. It took part in the invasion of the Netherlands and advanced toward Amsterdam during the first phase of the Western Campaign. In late May 1940, the division moved into Belgium, where it became involved in heavy fighting along the Lys River as German forces pushed deeper into the country. When units of the 225th Division reached the village of Meigem, they encountered strong resistance from the Ardennes Hunters defending the canal crossings. They also attempted to seize the bridge at Deinze, but failed under Belgian artillery fire. The German troops came under Belgian artillery shelling and suffered losses. Frustration and tension among the soldiers increased, and German soldiers seized civilians in the city of Deinze and used them as human shields while attempting to move forward. 38 civilians were killed during this phase of the fighting. On the 26th of May 1940, a rumor spread among German troops that Belgian civilians had fired upon them. Such accusations of Belgian civilian snipers had also been made during the First World War and had led to brutal reprisals. Whether any civilians in Vinkt and Meigem had actually taken part in the fighting has not been proved to this day. Nevertheless, the rumor was accepted by many German soldiers as a fact, and it provided a justification for collective punishment of the Belgian civilians in these two villages. On the 26th of May, dozens of inhabitants of Meigem were arrested and locked inside the village church as hostages. Families were separated, and fear spread through the narrow streets. At the same time, the fighting line ran between the two villages. Meigem was already in German hands, while the other village, Vinkt, was still defended by Belgian troops. Civilians found themselves trapped between two armies. On the next day, the situation escalated dramatically. King Leopold III of Belgium had by that time announced his intention to surrender. But until the formal capitulation of the Belgian king and government, Belgian units continued to resist and fought against the invaders. Throughout the day, heavy fighting took place in and around Vinkt. In the afternoon, a powerful explosion struck the church in Meigem, where the hostages were being held. 27 people were killed on the spot. Later interpretations suggest that Belgian artillery fire may have accidentally hit the building, as the church stood directly in the line of fire. For the German troops, however, the explosion and the deaths reinforced their conviction that they were not only fighting Belgian soldiers, but were also being attacked by hostile civilians. Suspicion hardened into anger, and the situation became even more dangerous for the remaining inhabitants. By approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, German forces, particularly the 377th Infantry Regiment of the 225th Division, gained control of Vinkt. The Belgian defense collapsed, and the village fell into German hands. What followed was not an organized battle, but a systematic reprisal and murder. German soldiers pushed inhabitants from their houses. Doors were kicked open, and families were forced into the streets. Women and children were separated from the men and gathered on a meadow belonging to a local farmer. The men were initially marched toward Meigem, but then they were forced to turn around and run back toward Vinkt in rows of 5. The soldiers, who believed that they had been fired upon by civilians, decided to punish the entire community of Vinkt. Executions took place in several locations. Elderly men were shot against the wall of a local monastery. At the wall of the clergyman's house, 16 people were executed. On the village square, 38 people were lined up and shot. 4 survived, severely wounded, lying among the bodies of neighbors and relatives. At a place known as the Zwart Massacre, 11 men were executed and buried in a mass grave. Additional shootings occurred elsewhere in the village. By the end of the day, 111 people had died on the 27th of May alone, either by execution or as a result of artillery fire or fighting in the village. The violence, however, did not stop on that day. On the morning of the 28th of May 1940, King Leopold III announced the Belgian capitulation, and officially the fighting in Belgium was over. Yet, in Vinkt, 9 more inhabitants were executed that day. They had been forced to dig their own graves before being shot. The act demonstrated that the killings were not the result of immediate combat heat, but of the deliberate decision of the German soldiers. Over the 4 days of fighting and reprisals in Vinkt and Meigem, a total of 140 people lost their lives. 86 were deliberately murdered in executions, and 27 died in the church explosion. The remaining victims were killed by shelling and crossfire during the combat. The massacre had consequences beyond the villagers themselves. News of the event spread rapidly and contributed to a second wave of civilians fleeing from Belgium. More than 1 million Belgians left the country in panic. By June 1940, according to estimates by the Red Cross, around 30% of the Belgian population was outside their state borders. But the murderers paid for their crimes with their own lives during the next stages of the Second World War. After the German victory in the West, the 225th Infantry Division remained on occupation duty until the end of 1941. In January 1942, it was transferred to the Eastern Front following the successful Soviet counter-offensive near Moscow. There, it became part of Army Group North and participated in major operations including the siege of Leningrad and battles near Lake Ilmen and Demyansk. The division suffered heavy losses over the following years, with thousands of its soldiers killed. In 1944, during the Soviet Baltic Offensive, Army Group North was cut off in western Latvia, forming what became known as the legendary Courland Pocket. Adolf Hitler refused to allow evacuation, despite advice from his senior officers. More than 200,000 German troops were trapped in the pocket. After months of Soviet offensives, the remaining German forces surrendered in May 1945. Approximately 135,000 German soldiers lay down their arms on the Courland Peninsula. Many were taken into Soviet captivity and went into the Soviet forced labor camp system. According to various sources, more than a third of German prisoners of war died in the Soviet Union as a result of hard physical labor, malnutrition, or the brutal conditions in Soviet camps. After the end of the Second World War, the massacre was also investigated by Belgian authorities. Erwin Kühne and Franz Lohmann were identified as responsible officers for the massacre and brought before a Belgian court. In 1950, both were sentenced to 20 years of forced labor. The massacres in Vinkt and Meigem stand as a reminder that even in the early days of the Second World War, long before the full-scale atrocities of the Eastern Front, units of the German army carried out deliberate killings of civilians everywhere, including the western part of Europe.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.